Good evening. It is Thursday, October 2nd, 2025 at 6 p.m. We are at the District Service Center in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the land of the Mdewakanton Dakota people. Mdewakanton means dwellers of the Spirit Lake. First item on the agenda is 1.0, roll call. Dana?
Louise Hines. Here. Ryan Clark.
Hello.
Sharon Van Leer.
Here.
Eric Tessmer.
Here.
Melinda Dole. Simi Petnaik.
Here.
Andrew Chasteen. Here. Matilda Samuel.
Here.
Katie Schwartz.
Here. 2.0, Pledge of Allegiance, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 3.0 is approval of our agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Sharon, seconded by Melinda. Any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. 4.0 is our student board representative reports, and this will be introduced by Superintendent Julie Nielsen.
Thank you. We are excited to welcome, and apologize, Ryan, they're taking over your space here, but our kids are a pretty big deal. We are excited to welcome 2 of our 3 student board reps in person, and of course, Taya, who got captured right at the moment, eyes not closed and ready to share. And they're going to be introducing themselves this evening. Just to set the stage, several years ago, we had student board representatives that attended our business meetings. And I think for some of our students, it got really long and probably kind of boring because there was a lot of information with not always a lot of discussion. During that time, students gave updates about their schools and what was happening. We heard a lot about the football games and the proms and the activities in the theater, etc. As we bring back the representatives, we wanted to be thoughtful about how best they might be able to interject and share their experiences related to the different agenda items. The decision was made to have the students attend workshop meetings where the conversations are less formal, allowing for the opportunity for student voice. So like this evening, it's literacy. I happened to ask Andrew and Matilda about, what do you think about the MCAs? So somewhere tied into all of this, we also want to make sure that student voice may be part of the presentation. So presenters, if you would have a question for the students, please feel free, and or board members, or I might just interject a question and ask them to put their voice in the space. Tonight I have asked each of our students to introduce themselves and share a bit about who they are, why they were interested in being part of this leadership opportunity, and there was a lot of excitement. We had 31 students apply from across the school district. So tonight I'm going to have Andrew open us up from Eastridge High School.
Hello. I was holding it. My bad.
Let's see.
Green is good. It's flashing. Broke it.
Andrew broke the first microphone. Here, Andrew, I'm going to give you mine, but be gentle.
Hello? Yes, you can. Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Chasteen. I am the representative from Eastridge High School. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Alabama, where then I moved to South Dakota, and then here. For 5th grade, I went to Middleton. I went to Lake Middle School, and then I have gone to Eastridge High School for freshman, sophomore, and junior year. But going into why more I want this role, I want to advocate for students who feel more like, they can't speak up for themselves. I would also like to push for an environment where everyone feels included, and also push and use the opportunity to network with other representatives, including Taya and Matilda, from the other schools to build those relationships, not just in Eastridge High School, but within the SoWashCo district. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matilda, and I'm from Woodbury High School. I'm a senior currently. The reason why I wanted to be a board representative is kind of for the similar reasons of wanting to be a voice for other people and wanting to be someone that others can go to for, issues that they may have with the school and everything, and feeling like they don't have a voice or feeling like they don't even know who to go to or what they can do to change it. And I wanted to be the person that can really speak up for them and make change when it feels like you can't make any. And some activity that I'm involved in, I'm in Black Student Union at my school. I'm on the board for Black Student Union and UNICEF at my school. I'm secretary for both. And I'm in Key Club, Student Council, Student Ambassadors, and other activities.
And Andrew didn't share that he's part of our band program and football program. And if you hadn't noticed, he did have ACL surgery. So he does have a brace underneath there. So we welcome him in this evening. Now we're going to hear from Taya from Park High School. So she just did a little video. She is actually off playing soccer tonight. Of course, her first meeting was a soccer game.
My name is Taya Alvarenga. I'm in 11th grade, and I will be this year's student representative for Park High School. I play soccer and basketball, and that's the reason I couldn't be at today's meeting. I have a soccer game.
Back in the control room, we are going to try to get this volume just a little bit louder.
I'm involved in various clubs, such as
Wonder if Taya would like the pause look right now. We can go ahead and play it again from the beginning, please.
Where's Sean? MIA.
Somebody in there? Doing something with the mouse here. I would go back in the control room, but I'm going to allow Dana to go back in the control room. Sean, this is what happens when you're gone. Yeah, he could.
Hi everyone, my name is Taya Alvarenga. I'm in 11th grade, and I will be this year's student representative for Park High School. I play soccer and basketball, and that's the reason I couldn't be at today's meeting. I have a soccer game in Forest Lake, so thank you for understanding. At Park High School, I'm involved in various clubs such as Student Council, National Honor Society, Key Club, DECA, and our Wolfpack Best Buddies program that is new this year, which I'm really excited for. And at Park, I just really love how easy it is to get involved. All these clubs are very accessible to me, and I've just felt so welcome wherever I go, and I've been able to meet so many awesome students and teachers, and so I'm just really looking forward to this opportunity and to hopefully provide some insight on behalf of the student body at Park. So thank you.
Thank you for being patient with that. And again, we welcome our board reps. We're going to pause it there, and you will have an opportunity to interject any questions you may have as we go through. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to 5.0, and that is our workshop items. We do have 3 this evening. And 5.1 is literacy, and that will be introduced by Kelly Jansen, Assistant Superintendent.
Good evening, and thank you. I am honored here to represent and introduce our teaching and learning team. Mark McAmoyle, our secondary teaching and learning director, and Jolene Mast is new to our team. She is our elementary teaching and learning director, comes to us from Pine Hill Elementary as the principal, and this is her first board meeting, so we wanted to formally introduce her. And then Leah Boulos, who is a teaching and learning supervisor and also serves as our very important district literacy lead, and has taken the role in our district literacy efforts as it relates especially to the READ Act. So we are here tonight to do our annual report on literacy, our board report. Tonight we plan to review the READ Act professional development and how that legislation has come to life in our classrooms. We'll talk a little bit about literacy curriculum, literacy data, and our next steps, and then we'll finish with the video from our students and staff out in our schools. So with that, I will turn it over to the team.
All right, thank you so much. Slides. Oh, there we go. Oh. one more. Perfect. The down arrow. There we go. All right, looks good. I'll start with this slide. All right, good evening, board members and community members. We're going to start with a quick introduction and a reminder about what the READ Act actually is. And the READ Act is legislation it stands for Reading to Ensure Academic Development, and it was signed into law by Governor Tim Walz in May of 2023. And the previous legislation before this was called Read Well by Third Grade, and so this replaced that. So whereas Read Well by Third Grade really focused on K-3 early literacy skills, the READ Act spans all age levels for kids. This, in my 25 years in education, has been the most comprehensive legislation that I've seen and the quickest moving in education. So it's been, just over 2 years, and it's moved very, very quickly. The goal of the READ Act is to have every child reading at or above grade level every year, beginning in kindergarten, and supporting our multilingual learners and students receiving special services, special education services, in achieving their individualized reading goals. Some of the things that are required by the READ Act, the first one is that we have to have an identification process with universal screening. And so for that, we have FastBridge, we use MAP, which is Measures of Academic Progress, and CAPTI Read Basics will be a new one that you'll hear about tonight. The second part is evidence-based curriculum and instruction, intervention, and we're using UFly, which is University of Florida Literacy Institute, and Bridge to Read right now with some supplemental resources. The third one is training in structured literacy, and this has been the biggest one, and I'd say probably the one that's the most complete that we have done so far. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but some of the things that you'll see for structured literacy training is that we've had teachers complete Carry-All, OLA, ALS, and letters. And then finally, the last one, every district is required to either contract or employ a district literacy lead. That is me, so that one, check, check. So SoWashCo schools have several policies and procedures in place to support this work, namely the school board policy that you're probably familiar with is Policy 626, Literacy and the READ Act. Procedures that we have in place to support implementation for the identification process. We have a procedure written for that, and we also have multi-tiered systems of support handbooks for all of the levels. For evidence-based curriculum and intervention, we have our SIRC process, or our Standards and Instruction Review Cycle, that is embedded with this, and it's ongoing work, as you'll hear tonight. And again, the multi-tiered systems of support handbook also supports this. And then the training in structured literacy, there's a procedure for that. It's also been a really strong partnership with HR to support that work and track the training that's been done. All right, so one of the things I'm most proud of as the district literacy lead, and we meet monthly across the state, is the work that's done here in SoWashCo. I do not know of any other districts that have tackled the READ Act in the way that we have in our district. The Department of Education just in the last week or so has identified the phase 2 teachers for the training, and they have identified reading teachers and English teachers for the secondary level, and we have superseded that. And these are some of the reasons why that we chose the path that we did in our training. So the first one is that we really wanted to create a deeper understanding of all the foundational literacy skills, how complex the science of reading is, regardless of which level our teachers were teaching at. It's a very complex thing. We wanted all teachers to have that depth of knowledge. The second thing is that regardless of our role, we all have an impact on a child's literacy development. I think that it's foolish to believe that really only after 5th grade that an English teacher or a reading teacher has an impact on a child's literacy journey. And so this is one of the reasons that we really expanded that beyond what the law was requiring. Recognize and differentiate for our students who might be struggling in any area of reading. We know that all of our kids show up to us with different strengths and different areas of needs. And so our students that might have reading difficulties, I feel like our teachers have a better understanding of what that looks like now and what they could maybe do and how to intervene, how to support them in a classroom. While we're not expecting them to teach those foundational skills, they're just able to recognize that in a different way than they were in the past. And then finally, I think this under Superintendent Nielsen's guidance last year, it was really impossible for us when MDE said, here's the READ Act. We started moving instantly. MDE took a while to get the guidance going to say, like, who should do this training? What does it look like? And we weren't waiting for that. And so when we really said who should go through this training, we felt it was impossible to say, well, this social studies teacher is really important in this child's literacy journey, but this math teacher not as much. And so we really feel very strongly that no one staff member is less responsible for this critical work of our students. And it shows up differently in every area. It was a stretch for some of our secondary teachers with some of the foundational skills that they were learning early on in the courses. And my words of advice for them every time was, take what you need from this. I don't know exactly what you need if you're a chemistry teacher or a math teacher or an English teacher, but you know your students best. And so this training is going to give you a really comprehensive look at what literacy is. And I'm asking you to take away what you need as a professional. And I really feel like our teachers did that. All right, so that's kind of our why and the redact and how we got here. And so we wanted to kind of catch you up with what has happened since last October, since we saw you last. So as I mentioned, we trained all of our teachers, everything from our birth through 22 plus and our adult basic education teachers. So more than 1,400 educators went through a training this last school year. Carry-all was most of our elementary teachers, and that was about 745 teachers. OLA was a majority of our secondary teachers. Adolescent Literacy Solutions, ALS, was a smaller subset of our secondary teachers. And then we did have some teachers prior to the redact who completed letters, which was also an approved training, and that was 30 of them. So they did not have to do any of the other trainings. They participated in all the synchronous work, but not the asynchronous learning. So about 1,400 teachers that have completed the structured literacy training. One of the things that's really important to us is training is something that's required, but what is this going to look like in the classroom? So these are some actual examples of what teachers have done in some transfer to practice activities in PLCs district-wide. So for elementary, an example is in Carry-all, they looked at Module 3, that was about language and literacy, and Elkonin boxes is a strategy. So Elkonin boxes are sound boxes where you would push up a token or a chip into each box, sounding out the phonemes or the sounds for the word bats. An example from high school science that they shared, they really focused on vocabulary, and vocabulary mapping was a strategy that they said that they would like to see present in all secondary science classrooms, showing the different types of weathering, the different connections from the words to examples, pictures, definitions, all the different ways to really truly know what that vocabulary word would mean. And then finally, go back one more, yep. Another example from our Next Step Pathways and Adult Education group, they were looking at morphology, and they thought it would be really great to focus on the root of words. So for them, they were looking at the customer service context of words, so using the roots serve, to serve, and man, meaning hand, and really getting the kids to understand how those roots would impact different words or help them to learn words that they would see in the workplace or in customer service. So we were really proud of the work that we did, but it wasn't just us that was so proud. I got to brag nonstop to other district literacy leads about what was happening around the district. But we had many outside trainers working with our staff, and these are just a few of the comments that we got from our outside trainers. And I just would be remiss if I didn't share that other people also thought our teachers are doing great things. All right, and then education. This is not required by the statute, but education isn't just of our teachers, it's of our families as well. So last year we offered Family Academy nights, and so we had 3 of them. The first one in December focused on 5 pillars of literacy and what that would look like across all the grade levels. We had everything from early childhood through high school there. In January, we talked about morphology and the importance of the connection of reading and writing. And then we broke up into an elementary group and a secondary group, and we walked them through some of the practices that they might see in those settings, in those classrooms. And then finally, we had a resource fair in the spring where we had different vendors and community resources to share out. As we mentioned, with part of the redact, universal screening is a required part of that. So there are 2 approved screeners that we could use. We use FastBridge. And this was new to us last year. So these are all of the screeners that we started using last fall. And you can see the ones that we used in fall, winter, and spring during the 3 required screening windows. And we'll talk about the data coming up in just a few minutes.
Good evening. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to some of the data here this evening. So we're going to chunk the data into two different categories. One is really satellite data, which would be more of the standardized testing, and then the classroom data that really informs instructional moves. So we'll look at MCAs, we'll look at the pre-ACT, ACT, and then on the classroom level, our Universal Screener FastBridge, and then our ERLA.
Okay, we're going to start with MCA reading data, and this is the MCA 3, and this test was started in 2010. And in 2020, we did have new ELA standards and benchmarks. And now, this coming school year in 2026, we are actually going to have the MCA 4, which actually will assess the standards that we have been implementing since 2020 when they changed those. So we're really looking forward to seeing the new test from these standards that we've been implementing and doing work around since 2020. We do want to point out, though, this will be difficult for next year to compare because they will be two separate tests. So this will be really the last time we're looking at the MCA 3. So this graph is talking about grades 3 through 5 for reading proficiency. And you can see from the 4 years, we are staying pretty consistent. This last 24-25, we have 55.4% meets or exceeds, and then 21% partially meeting, and then 23.6% that did not meet. I do want to point out that that partially meets, that is changing for the MCA 4. They're going to call that now intermediate. And those are really students that are developing proficiency, and they're working toward that goal, but hasn't quite hit the complexity that's required for that particular grade level at that particular time that they take that test. And just a reminder, you know, that reading is really a continuum. So that's what that is measuring.
Thanks, and then we'll also look at, we've bundled grades 6 through 8 on our MCAs. I think I would point out how excited we are as a former English and social studies teacher, and what Leah said, and she mentioned that we really believe that all of us are reading teachers. The opportunity to slow down and break down vocabulary and help students see and increase their comprehension, we think there's really a great opportunity to move that partially meets with some intentionality into the meets expectations. So then going on to our 10th grade, you'll see similar scores are relatively flat over the past 4 years. But again, we are very hopeful with the staff development that we've had in the last year that we're going to be able to make gains in this area. Next we'll, go ahead.
This one is looking at all of them together. So grades 3 through 8 and the 10th grade over since 2021. And it also adds in the state proficiency level as well. So you can see how the state has compared to South Washington as well. But we do recognize with all of those that we're really, our eye is on South Washington kids and how they are performing on this test.
And that's well said, Jolene. We have referenced these districts in the past in World's Best Workforce, now known as CACR. So that is why we are referencing them on this slide. And our priority is our students. But for context, you can see in the 24-25 school year where we were in comparison to those districts. Next, we'll look at the pre-ACT data. And this is really data that points to students and their ability to be on track towards the college readiness benchmark that is identified as part of the ACT. Then we'll move on to look at our ACT data, and there's a typo on this slide. It has been rectified and is accurate online, but this should say ACT data reading. And this data represents the percentage of students that meet the college readiness benchmark. And now sometimes people ask, well, what is the college readiness benchmark? What does it indicate? And this really is an indicator of student success at a college entry humanities, social science class.
Okay, so we kind of looked at some of those satellite data, and now we're really going more to the more local level, the data that we use to make instructional decisions for kids. And one of those, and Leah talked about it earlier, is the FastBridge assessment. And this was new to us last year. We will continue it for many years to come, probably, but for this year as well. And this is how our students did on last year. And we do want to point out kindergarten, that is, it does appear that 42% in the fall and then in the spring. But these are two different benchmarks the students are being asked to perform at. And then kindergarten did also add another test. So we're really proud of how kindergarten did on that FastBridge screener. And then amazing growth both in first, second, and third grade. So we're anxious to see this year, with all the things that we are implementing and improving on, to see what our FastBridge data comes out with. And then the last one that we do use instructional decision making for is the independent reading level assessment. We call it the IRLA. And this goes with our ARC reading curriculum. And this is something that classroom teachers would be giving students. There is a cold read, so reading passage, and then there are subtests for students to perform. And this is actually for June 4th. So when they ended the grade level, and right when they end the grade level, it switches over. So if I'm a third grader on June 4th, now I'm being measured as a fourth grader. So we are really looking to see at what students are coming in and how we can support them right away at the beginning of the year with the new set of criteria.
All right, so a lot of work has been done, a lot of data has been shared, and the READ Act continues this year. There's a lot of work that we have ahead of us this year as well. So training continues this year. We will continue per policy 626, train all of our new to SoWashCo staff, and at last check, it was about 70 to 80 teachers in our structured literacy. Many teachers, it was really exciting, as they were hired this year, would be talking to human resources saying, hey, I've already taken one of the trainings, where can I submit my certificate? So I've had a number of those teachers already come from another district that have completed a training, and we will, that's weird, you're perfect. And so we're waiting on some guidance from MDE to come out hopefully this week or so, but that training for new to district staff will start in the next couple of weeks. The really big lift for us this year is training our paraprofessionals. So our regional literacy networks in partnership with the Department of Education have come up with a training for 2-hour modules for paraprofessionals. And so we have about 15 trained trainers in our district that are delivering this. And so we had our first training on this past Monday on the 29th. And we have about 450 paraprofessionals. Our human resources department had to interpret the law, and so we determined that it would be all of our program paraprofessionals, so those 450, and we had about 89% attendance from our paraprofessionals, which I think is beyond outstanding. I was not sure what the threshold of success was going to look like, but we only had about 50 paraprofessionals that were not at the training, and then in addition to that, our supervisory paras that were invited that day but not required by statute to be there, we had about half of those paraprofessionals attend too. So we had over 450 people in attendance that day. It was really a great day. And we'll conclude this training on November 4th for the second part of those modules. So I told the paras I get to humbly brag about them now too, because I do not know another district that has trained that many paras. For our universal screening, elementary will continue with our K-3 screeners with FastBridge. We're also adding some diagnostic assessments this year. Just because a child scores is flagged on the letter sounds test does not automatically mean that they need an intervention. That is a 1-minute time test. The child could maybe just have needed more time to recall it. And so we're adding diagnostics so we can really dig deeper to see, is this an issue for the kid, or do we need to just, does the child just need a little bit more time? For secondary, we did get some guidance last spring from the Department of Education to add to the universal screener for grades 4 through 12th grade. and there is one option only, and so that is Capta You Read Basics. And because of the timing of when it came out, we have to deliver that to any students who we have foundational reading concerns about by February 15th this year. Moving forward after this year, we will be doing that for any students that are below grade level with foundational skills in the fall. Evidence-based curriculum and interventions. This is the area we're probably still working on the most. For elementary, for foundational skills, we have American Reading Company as our core comprehensive resource, as you know, and we're in year 4 of that. And it's typical in a curriculum cycle to kind of pause and say, what's working, what's not working, where are the gaps? And with what we know about our students and where they're at, the data and what it's telling us, and with the guidance that the Department of Education has given us too, we have decided to look a little bit deeper at foundational skills resources. And so for kindergarten through 2nd grade, we'll be using UFly, as we mentioned earlier, as a foundational skills resource for that phonics and phonological awareness piece. And then grades 3 through 5, we're looking for a morphology resource. That work is just getting started with our reading specialists right now. And for both of those, we hope to we will be having training this spring and implement it next fall. Then the final thing that we're doing for elementary is we have K-5 implementation this year of priority benchmarks in literacy. So we've identified 5 priority benchmarks across the year for every grade level that we're really focusing in on that focus on those key skills for students. For secondary, we will be revisiting our learning from the training last year and figuring out what does transfer to practice look like. So we'll be revisiting that on the November 4th Professional Development Day. And then we're also waiting for guidance from the Department of Education, expected out any day now, on evidence-based literacy interventions for grades 4 through 12. And so my hope is to begin a SERC, Standards and Instruction Review cycle in January with that MDE guidance and their recommendations. So that is what we'll be doing for secondary.
All right, so as you can see on this presentation, there has been a lot of work that has been done and a lot of learning. But with the learning, we always want to see how is it getting to students. So we wanted some professionals in the field to talk about what we are seeing as far as the transfer to practice, just from the training this last year, but the changes that are happening even this year are even greater. So we're just going to let them speak for themselves a little bit from our different schools.
Brought us together in some sense to kind of let us know, like, where are we with foundational skills? So I think our primary teachers, ourselves as administrators, like wondering, are we doing enough? And do we have enough in our tier 1? So it really did.
I think we've incorporated a lot of different resources that we were exposed to really try and get that explicit instruction. Like we started UFly. We started switching groups around according to what their needs are. So we were personalizing the instruction.
But they loved coming up with words that they thought had these prefixes and then trying to figure out the definitions.
And even making words that weren't words by putting and then kind of it was almost a funny, they haven't done it. It's new and exciting to them right now because I just think it's something we haven't really focused on.
Another thing we're going to do more of this year is more practice with literacy. So finding articles and having students choosing articles and pulling stuff from that and talking about the words that they see that they recognize that they might need help with versus just having, like maybe a short article about a specific science thing. We're going to do more articles where they're pulling the information out themselves. So
the application is that we use a lot of like word walls, and with our literacy, with like learning notes and rhythms and such, and making those connections within music.
As a resource teacher, just breaking things down, and the biggest part that I took away was vocabulary instruction. So we switch every single year of what we teach and what groups we're with. So what we're trying to do is have materials that can be passed down from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade as we switch case managers. So we are asking teachers to tell us their top 3 vocab words in each of their units so that we're able to pre-teach, reteach, and display them in our rooms.
There was a lot of appreciation to our elementary friends who teach kids really to read, and then a good push in, so what does it mean for high school if we're not actually teaching the foundational literacy skills, but how can we help support vocabulary acquisition?
I think just being more intentional about why a student is having more prompts
and giving them a reason for reading the article or they're reading. So there's always like something that they need to be doing with it, whether it's marking the text or circling key terms.
As district leaders, we're talking together about it, looking at data, and our PLCs, we're really focused too on how we can do a better job to serve our kids.
So any questions for us?
Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, I have a question. So I'm noticing on all the different grade levels for the MCA from 21, 22, and then the preceding years that they've gone down slightly, where 21, 22 was the highest. And I remember when you first were telling us about when this came about, how sometimes things have to, when there's a new reading program, things go down a little bit before they go up. Is that what you would contribute this to then?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. I think part of it too could be the foundational skills that we're going to be refocusing on. I think specifically our primary teachers felt very empowered by the knowledge. And they're like, I didn't know this. I didn't learn this in my undergrad program. So I'm hoping that that will be a contributing factor too. And it's tough because the screening, the FastBridge looks at really those foundational skills where the MCA looks at more of those complex application skills. So I think it's a both and. I think we have to be really careful to make sure that we're kind of meeting all the needs that the different tests might give us information on.
Okay. So one of the questions, I have a few questions. I'm sure you guys are shocked. For the structured literacy programs, the OLA and Carry-All, what is the difference between the programs or why certain teachers went through one program versus another?
Great question. So there are 3 approved by the state, Letters being one of them that we did not use. Letters is about 150 hours of PD. Carry-All and OLA were about 50 hours each. And I think they all cover the same thing. They were all approved for phase 1 teachers. So they really were geared at those K-12, special ed, K-12 English learners, and then K-3 teachers. So I have it's a very robust understanding of the whole scope of literacy. I think it was really kind of capacity that we thought like Carry-All would be a good fit for elementary and OLA would be a better fit. OLA had more asynchronous and less synchronous time. And so they then had more time synchronously to connect with peers, and so we felt like that was a better match. And then the other one that we used, ALS, was not an MDE approved one. We knew those teachers were likely not going to be identified by MDE as requiring to take this, and that course was by the same vendor as OLA, but it was specifically designed for secondary teachers. And so we could use that one because we knew it wasn't going to be teachers who were required to take it. And so that's why we went with that one.
Okay. And then one of the questions I had was, you have in here, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You have in here that, roughly half the kids meet or exceed standard, and then about another, call it 20% quarter, partially meet. And you had mentioned that they're making progress toward meeting, but they haven't quite yet hit the benchmark. So in any given year, if I'm a kid who partially meets, how likely am I to meet next year? I don't know if you know, I don't even know if that's a solvable or an answerable question.
Yeah, it's a tough one because the standards are different at every grade level, so they're kind of different tests, but of course we're always looking at kids who are partially meets every year. We first look at our core, like what are we doing for all of our kids, because all of our kids really should be getting the instruction to meet, and so that really starts with the core, and then taking a look at, is this something deeper, do they need some sort of intervention support? So, go ahead.
So I would just add too that MCA data should really not be used for instructional decision making for individual students. MCA is more for us to look as school-wide or district-wide especially on how we are doing as a system. We would want to lean into some of the more local data pieces for making instructional decisions for students.
Okay, so like the MCAs will say like at Simi's elementary school, there's a lack of like phonemic awareness. And so you know that at this elementary school, we need to push more phonemic awareness overall and not specifically to Louise or Eric or Melinda or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, so we would not then put you in an intervention based on your MCA results. We may say, all right, we need to look more at this and then pull in all the other data pieces. Our MCA data comes out, well, we get kind of preliminary in the spring. We don't see it until the fall. It's almost kind of a little late.
Like you've already
to make
started
those-
planning
yes,
for
to
the
make
fall
those
before
sorts
the
of
MCA
things.
data is even
So we're
shared.
going to lean into some of the other data points to really give us targeted information that we need.
Okay. And so when we see like these partially meet standards, like are we seeing sort of consistent themes across grades or across schools, or is it kind of just a hodgepodge and every year is sort of a new grab bag of concerns we want to address?
Yes. So, and Leah's probably, I mean, you can correct me on this, but what I look at the MCAs, it does not kind of drill down very nicely into maybe as MAP would do or a different type of test. It is really just a very broad look. And what Leah was talking to us too about is it is only measuring a very small portion of the literacy benchmarks for that grade level. So I don't want to quote you on the number, but.
Yeah, there's, for the 2010 standards that this test is based off of, I think there's like around 40 to 45 standards for each grade level. And this only, and there's, so we have like language strands that aren't addressed, writing, listening, speaking, viewing, and media literacy. It only looks at reading, and it only assesses 7 of the 10 benchmarks as well, too. So it's a pretty small subset of the overall standards.
So children could meet these standards at large, right? But not meet what they are specifically being tested on?
It really just looks at key ideas and details, and craft and structure are really the only things that it looks at for the students on the MCAs, are really the 2 strands. So it doesn't do anything isolated for vocabulary or any of those foundational skills, phonics, phonemic awareness. That's not part of anything on the 3rd grade MCA.
Okay, and then is that expected to change with the new MCAs, or you just
no,
don't know?
it will. It'll be very similar. The changes in the English language arts standards are somewhat small for the MCA 4 and for the new standards.
And so then lastly, with FastBridge, can you, like I'm a toddler, explain it like I'm a toddler. What specifically does FastBridge measure? Because when I look at the numbers, right, to go from like 40% in kindergarten to like 90% in 3rd grade seems like a tremendous improvement. And so what is it that I am looking at to kind of level set how kids are making this kind of?
That's a great question. So yes, because it does look very different. So these are the required subtests. So there was the pretty colorful one that had a chart on there for what we do in each grade level for each season. So in kindergarten and 1st grade, you'll see the most tests. So like in kindergarten, for example, we're looking at letter names, letter sounds. So they get 1 minute. It's a time test. How many can they name? And we're looking for automaticity, so they have to do it within 3 seconds. And then we are doing word segmenting too. Then in winter and spring, we add nonsense words. So can they decode made-up words with phonics? So that's what we're looking at. Then in 1st grade, it's totally, and then the benchmark is very low. We just tested our kindergartners now. None of our kindergartners are high risk. Good news, because they can't be, because there is no threshold for high risk, because we're like, they're just getting here. They haven't learned anything yet. And so that's why then, by the time we get to spring, there is a high risk category, because there's so many more, there's an additional test, and there's so many things. In 2nd grade, we look at some similar subtests, word segmenting, nonsense words, and then we add what's called the CBMR, and that's basically a timed reading. They get 1 minute, and they do 3 different passages, so 3 1-minute timed readings, and we're looking at how accurately can they read, and what is their words correct per minute. So really how quickly and how accurately. And so that's kind of goes into that composite for 1st grade. 2nd and 3rd grade, we're just looking at that CBMR, so those 3 timed readings. And then for any kids that are flagged on that, we give them the nonsense word test to make sure that there aren't any phonics issues. So for 2nd and 3rd grade, we're really looking at those timed readings, whereas kindergarten and 1st have many more subtests.
Okay, and so with the, when I'm looking at this, like, so am I interpreting this correctly that, so in the spring, 53% of 1st graders meet the benchmark, so then they go to 2nd grade, 53 meet the benchmark, 47 don't, and so, but then of the 47% that don't, like 40% of them are, well, sorry, not 40%, 30, whatever the math is, right? They make enough improvement over the course of the year on those 2nd grade benchmarks, and the implication is that they've also made the improvements on the 1st grade benchmarks that they were missing earlier?
Yes, I mean, we don't have to go back and give the previous year's subtests with the whole battery of tests is open. Schools can choose to give more of these assessments. There's a lot of other tools within FastBridge too. But yeah, it is, each grade level is kind of assessing different things that we're looking at. So, but yeah, we really track the kids within that cohort from fall to winter to spring. And this is part of the local literacy plan. So really the whole chart that this came from is in our local literacy plan that we submit to the state, all that data. Did I answer that?
But the only comparisons that we have across school districts is the MCAs. There's no other
We can look at FastBridge across schools too. We can break it down by school, by classroom. Absolutely. In fact, I was sitting with some schools today doing that work.
Okay.
It's really exciting.
My second question, it's not actually a second question, but so for high school, I guess, Mark, this would be you, with the what is the gap between the pre-ACT readiness and the ACT readiness? Because that looks like quite a decline.
Simply 2 years ago. Sorry. Yes, notice the same. Numbers 2 years ago, there was a significant decline there. And in doing some thinking about that, and what the research would say is, it's a lower stakes test. The rigor of the questions tend to be quite different between the pre-ACT and the ACT. And by no means does this mean, is this excuse making, but the rigor of the type of thinking on the questions as well. It's more comprehension based, one could say, in the pre-ACT, whereas the synthesis and the inferencing and that higher level thinking is much more challenging on the ACT. There are a number of variables. The pre-ACT, and it's great to have students here at the table to hear as well, but it's also an you're ready, aren't you? It's an opt-in, whereas we test all of our 11th graders at the ACT, so there's so many variables that contribute. I would say the data 2 years ago was an anomaly with that 17%. I noticed the same thing, 17% difference. But the other 3 years of the 4 seem to be a little bit more similar.
Okay.
And would I believe, mirror the discrepancy between pre-ACT and ACT in a lot of districts.
Did we notice it? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
You should go ahead, Andrew. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, God.
Hold it down here.
Down here?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So for the pre-ACT, I took it as well last year, and I will be honest, my math teacher from that year helped us study for that and helped us prepare for that, but no matter what, it's still a hard test. I mean, and like you said, it's a low stakes test. It doesn't really seem as important, even though it is to see where we are for students who need to take the ACT, where I come in is from when I took it, there were kids in that classroom with me, sped through it within 5 minutes. Kids, especially 10th grade, freshmen, middle school, and I will say in middle school, I didn't really, my 6th grade or 8th grade year, the MCAs I didn't really think were important, so I didn't really do my best on them. And once I learned in high school that they were basically research based off what y'all look at, that's when I started trying. But our teachers back in middle school would have to kind of force us to try. There are kids that can fly through it in 5 minutes. There are kids that actually try, which are the ones who exceed. Most of the kids that don't try just click one question, go to the next, click one question, go to the next. I did that my 8th grade year. Hey, I'm being honest. But the same thing happened with the pre-ACT. Not what I did. I tried on that, and I still struggled. But I think the reason why we're seeing such a decline, would you say it's a bit of a decline in the MCA and the pre-ACT? Or is it kind of stable, would you say?
Fairly stable.
Fairly stable?
Yeah.
In my opinion, I just feel like we need to push teachers to try, or teachers to, and students to try their best on these tests, because these state standardized tests are important to see where we're at as schools, where we're at as teachers, and where we're at as students, not just, oh, click this and you're done. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Good.
you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I do have a question. Leah, you had mentioned that, try to categorize this right, but you mentioned that some of the 7 out of the 10, or there's only 7 maybe out of 10 benchmarks that the MCA recognizes or utilizes in their assessment. That being said, I guess there's other assessments that are used to maybe paint a better picture, but that being said, is the MCA the predominant, I guess, assessment tool that's used to indicate the proficiency level at each grade level by and large?
I would say no. I think our schools definitely use that, and like Jolene said, it's really great for, especially for a teaching and learning department, to take a look at our curriculum, what we're doing, what supports do our teachers need. But actually, in the MCA, like test specs, if you will, it recommends that all the other ones are tested with classroom assessments. So those might be, we could use things like the MAP test for that, or classroom designed assessments. This year, we're working on common summative assessments across the district for our priority benchmarks in all grade levels. And so that would be one thing we would look at. Like, for this benchmark, here's the common assessment that we're giving for all 6th graders in 6th grade English. What is the data telling us? Can they do this or can they not? And to build those, we're using the guidance from MDE, where they say, here's what proficient looks like for that. So that's the guidance that we're using for that. So yeah, so MCA is important for us to look at for a systems level, but it's not the most important thing for us to look at with kids. I'd say we have other tools for that. We'll use the MAP test, we'll use the CAPD Read Basics, and then other local assessments in the classroom.
So it seems like a very complex system. Is there a way to give I guess, a simple assessment on, look, these are our kids in this grade, in this school district. Based on what we have, all those assessments, this many are proficient at reading at this level. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah. At that particular time, I mean, so we have a new tool this year called EduClimber. That's our, would you call it a data warehouse? Yeah, EduClimber. And so what we can do with EduClimber is we can build data walls. So we can take the MCA data, we can take MAP data, we can take common summatives, we can take attendance in there, and we can build a data wall. So I can take a look at a school or a grade level or a classroom or a student, and that will give me a picture of what that student or what that classroom is able to do. So that's a tool that we use because I was joking with another literacy colleague today, like sometimes that reading is a little bit more complex. We don't find that they're often like, oh, they're great at all the things in reading. Like it might be a writing thing, it might be a reading thing. So that's what we probably would do, is use a tool like EduClimber to really build a picture around that kiddo. And when we are looking at our kids who are referred for special services or interventions, we look at all those pieces of data. So I don't have an exact number that could tell you this kid is good and this kid is not proficient at reading. Would you guys have anything to add for that?
I mean, I guess I speak from an elementary level. It's always a changing thing for students in literacy. I mean, especially in elementary, they are growing at such a fast pace. So we need to respond very quickly to students when they indicate on any of these assessments that they are falling below where we would want them at that particular time, so we can intervene and help them right away. So that's something that we're working on, I know at all levels, but especially at the elementary level in K-1, 2, to ensure that kids, when they're coming in and we see an assessment that's maybe below what we would want it to be, that they get the help that they need. But as far as MCAs, I mean, you can look at that and say, this is one way of looking at literacy and how students are doing in reading. As a district, that is one of the measures, and it is the measure that the state is going to use for South Washington. So,
And I would just add, at the secondary level, I was just in a classroom today at Park High School, and technology is really revolutionizing the data that we can get in real time on our students in terms of locally assessing, like during the class period, and then actually utilizing AI to quickly have a synthesis of how the students are performing, and then provide specific feedback from the teacher to the students in real time in the classroom. And that was just an experience today, again, highlighting the importance of local assessments to understand instructional moves, more than necessarily data that sometimes we call like autopsy data. It's after the fact.
Yeah, I guess my best example would be, I was at some elementary schools today meeting with reading specialists, and we looked at this, we screen all kids. We make sure we don't miss anybody. Everybody gets the screener. From there, anybody that's flagged, we want to dig a little bit deeper. So then we give a diagnostic. And from there, we take a look at what is it. And so reading specialists were showing me, here's kind of what we determined there's areas of needs. Like before, we would have just said like, oh, all these kids that are flagged, they go into an intervention. Now we're saying, oh, these kids really need word segmenting. These kids need more letter sound correspondence. And they said, we're using more data than ever before. And there's always that concern of over-testing kids. And I have to say that our staff is really embracing this because they feel like we know what kids need sooner and we can intervene sooner. And then they were even sharing on their spreadsheets too. This kid has been in intervention since kindergarten, or this kid is a new one to pop up on our radar. So there's so many factors to overlay with those kiddos, but I think we do have the right tools to do it. And so we just need to make sure that we're enacting all these things with our kids.
I think I'd go back to the original goal of the READ Act too, that every child is reading at grade level. And even MDE has cautioned in using MCA data to determine that. So we've determined different measures, whether it's the MAP or the Fast Bridge, and intervening throughout the year, and in the spring they do this. But even MDE has said MCA isn't reading at grade level. It's performance on these standards, and which reading is much more than just the standards on there. So it is confusing, and it is our accountability test, and we know that, and we know that there are other measures that we're using for grade level reading. So it's complicated, as is reading.
So this may seem like a dumb question, but I'm gonna ask it. So if I present to you a student, and are you able to tell, is somebody able to tell me, yes, this child is reading at grade level?
Yes.
Okay.
And yet, that child might be partially proficient on the MCA.
Mm-hmm.
But they're reading at grade level. And according to all of the foundations of literacy, like they have met all of these at grade level, but the day that they took the MCA reading test, they're partially proficient. And that's a confusing message for families, I would guess.
Okay. But if you could tell me that one particular child is reading at grade level, then you can give me a percentage for the entire district per grade.
Using Fast Bridge, using MAP, whatever the measures that we're going to use.
So
Absolutely.
is that being done, I guess, for each particular child?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what our MTSS process is. That's what it looks like. We screen, we do diagnostics, we intervene, and we are always focusing on the core instruction before we intervene.
Every child K-8 is taking that screener in the fall.
This past fall?
This past fall. Every child K-8. In ninth grade is when we're gonna, the high school is the new nuance this year. That was added with the 412. But every child took that screener this fall. We actually have a meeting in a couple weeks to look at now, in middle school in particular, because elementary, this is old hat, they've been doing it. But in middle school, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna triangulate that data then. So we're gonna look at where they were on the screener, we're gonna look at what services are they receiving, and is there any other things we need to consider, like rapid guessing, or things that might come out on that test. And then we're gonna develop this list of kids who are not reading at grade level. And then we're gonna send notes home to parents, and we're gonna provide interventions, and that's where that CAPTI Read Basics comes in. Is that next steps that gives us that diagnostic then of what is it that Mark is not reading at grade level on, and then that's what we can intervene on. So that is the new step that the READ Act has given us for middle school and high school kids. We've been doing it at elementary though.
I think the question for the public or anybody to say, like, is my child reading at grade level? Like, what are you asking? Like, that's what I always want to know first. Like, we look at the MCA data and we can look at third grade and say it's about 50%, but then we look at the Fast Bridge screening data and we're sitting at 92%. So that tells us that our kids can decode accurately. So if you're wanting kids to be able to read with their eyeballs and decode the words quickly and accurately, we're almost 100%. But when it comes to some of the more complex and nuanced skills, and then that's just so based on like what text is in front of them. Like I'm reading about penguins and I don't know anything about penguins. I'm going to disengage from this, or I don't want to read this, or this passage is too long. That's where the MCA data gives us a little bit more of a holistic picture with those higher level skills. But again, it's one snapshot in time. So that's why we presented both of those things for third grade, because I think that shows the biggest discrepancy of reading at grade level. Like, what does it really mean? Decoding, or does it mean all the skills comprehensively?
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys talking about this, because I'm not trying to make this more simple than it is, because it's complex, I understand it, it's abstract ideas and whatnot. But I think that if we have a particular, I don't know if you want to say problem, but obstacle or something that we're trying to overcome here, we have to understand clearly where we are and where we want to get to. Now, the state has indicated that we want every child to be reading at grade level. As you indicated, what does that mean? And nobody can answer that, frankly. Nobody can answer that, which in my opinion is a problem. And I'm not saying I'm the guy to solve it, I'm just saying it's a problem. So I guess based on the entire discussion, is anybody able to give me an idea, like, realistically? Look, I think realistically, not every child is going to be reading at grade level, okay? Realistically, what percentage of kids can we actually get that are reading at grade level? I mean, what are we trying to get to here?
Yeah, I would have to get back with the exact numbers, but when I am hearing your question, I think I would go straight to our fall assessments that we just finished up in elementary to say Fast Bridge, this is the number, and I don't have that graph sitting in front of me, but this is the number of right now in elementary per grade level of students that on the Fast Bridge test is proficient or not. And so that would give you a good number, and I can get it to Mrs. Nielsen about it, of this is the amount of students that we are now looking at closely to say, do we have other data to support that, kind of what we've talked about. But we right now know at a K-5 level which student right now in the fall has either shown up on that screener as at risk at all on that screener. So we could get that data for you for the fall.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's less important, and I would take it, but it's less important for me to know. It's more important for you all to know, because you are the ones that have the very difficult task of dealing with this. So as long as you have that information and know where you want to get to with it.
Yeah, I'd say most of our elementary schools that I've met with in the last week or so already have interventions up and running. So they've already looked at that data, they've dissected it, they've looked at it upside down and sideways, given the diagnostics. And middle school is just finishing up with that in the next week or so. And then high school will be working on coming up in the next couple of weeks, months maybe.
When we started the screening process with the steering team this last fall, we took last year's data, because to your point, everyone's looking at our MCA saying, there's no way we can intervene with 50% of our kids. Like 50% of our kids are not reading at grade level, not to use a double negative, but so we were like, what are we gonna use to determine if they're reading at grade level? Well, let's use our MAP scores. So we took our MAP scores and then we triangulated that data with, are they receiving EL services? Are they receiving special ed services where their reading at grade level might be a different level because of the services that they need? And then again, those other factors that might come into play. It was around 10 to 11% of kids per grade level that would need an intervention of not reading at grade level. So to try to get down to, like, I think what you're asking, it was around 10 to 11%. I would say we would love that number to be less than 5% of kids that are not reading at grade level. So I think that's what you're asking. And
Yeah, that is exactly right.
Yeah, because when you see this, it's not an intervention problem if it's 50% of your kids. It's a core problem. But when we actually used the data about reading at grade level, it was around 10 to 11%.
Okay, and then last question. My concern is, or not my concern, but I guess something that I could foresee happening is in the effort to try and, maybe as you said, bring that number from 10% to 5% or whatever, that standards get laxed. Is there some sort of I mean, I understand maybe Minnesota Department of Education, but is there some sort of a body or some set of individuals that are ensuring that these standards are upheld so that we're not dropping standards or, whatever, just to say, oh, yep, we got another 2% in there, we're good.
Right, like teaching to the test, that's not our goal, right? So,
right.
Yeah, and I think that's what Leah was saying with we've determined these 7 standards we are gonna teach and reteach and teach and reteach until kids understand this. And that's what the new data warehouse system of EduClimber is gonna give us, because now we're gonna be able to see by standard where teachers and kids are these the right standards that are aligned to this test and that test? And so it's not teaching to the test, but it's teaching the right things. And it's continually teaching the right things that will eventually show on these accountability tests.
My colleague Ben Lucino would love your question, Eric, because when we talk about intervention, we always think about we're talking about the kids that are struggling, but we can't forget about the kids who can already do it. And so when we give the FastBridge screener, if I am a teacher in a kindergarten classroom and 92% of my kids met the benchmark, I need to adjust my pacing when I'm talking about letter sounds and letter ID, because my core instruction needs to change, and I need to make sure that I'm meeting the needs of those kids. I'm not going to just do what I planned on doing over the summer. I need to respond to the kids in front of me. So you're absolutely right. We do need to make sure that we are looking at both ends of the spectrum, and that's really what the MTSS process does. We have this data. What do we know about our kids? Well, we have all of our kids here. Some are here and some are here. What are our actions to take as teachers? So 100%, we need to make sure that we're, and that's the biggest thing with the MCAs too that we're seeing, is that we do need to make sure that we're having the rigor, that we're putting complex text in front of kids. We talked with the paras last week about complex academic language, like not baby talking things. Like the rigor needs to be there for all of our kids. We can't have preconceived notions about what our kids can and cannot do. Like, oh, we're not going to do this question today, it's too hard for the kids. We need to have that rigor for all of our kids.
Yeah, and it's not something that we can rely on somebody at the state level to manage. It's something really that every teacher in this school district who's instructing children how to read needs to take it upon themselves to adhere to that standard year after year. And if there's a teacher in this district that's been here, I don't know, 25, 30 years or whatever, they should have an idea, or even frankly 10 years, whatever, they should have an idea as to, yes, this next group of or this next year of kids that I've had compared to the last year and the year after that, they're reading better or more proficiently. So, and I mean, you know that, obviously. I don't mean to sound like I'm telling you something you don't know, but I guess that's it.
Luis, Ryan, Sharon, do any of you have any questions?
No, my questions are covered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Five 5.2 is Board Governance Plan Yearly Review, and that will be presented by myself. So all of you will have the 3-year Board Governance Work Plan in front of you. We are going over what we have, the 24-25. So does anybody have anything that they would like to cover? Do we feel that these have been done? Does anybody have any questions on any of these?
We didn't add anything in for this year, correct? There's nothing new.
No, everything is what we did
last year.
Yes, when we originally did the 3-year.
Katie, I would maybe just point out for the board, Dana and I had the chance to go back through, and so we made some marks. I'm trying to see the copies out there, just to talk about when we did different things. So all of you are very aware of district policies. We do them monthly. Our student handbook was approved in July of 2025. So we have a lot of dates in that 24-25 column. As Dana and I walked through that and captured dates, there were some underneath self-governance. It's kind of like the school improvement plan. Sometimes you don't get to things, you might move them forward, sometimes you might revise them. But the 3 things in there where it said none, annual board self-evaluation, and then board professional development 2 times annually. We were really in a good pattern. I think when we got new board members on, we did board training 2 times a year. I don't know that that happened this past year. And then board listening sessions were on, and I know that the board had a conversation and decided maybe there was not a need right now for that. So just to point out that I think those were the 3, as well as retreats, which also was the professional development, but just retreats.
Yeah, so I would say I know that we did decide not to do the board listening sessions. And then I know we had some discussions around the annual board self-evaluation. And I think the reason we didn't is because we were not getting board members to complete it. we were getting roughly 50%, if that were actually completing the self-evaluations. So again, that is something that we definitely can, if we want to bring that back, that it can be done. I do think we do need to, it will be after, the first of the year. We will have at least one new board member since Eric did not run, so we will have at least one new board member. So I do believe that that should be something that should be done next year. And then maybe we keep on that schedule unless there is something that board members want to do annually. And we could tie those in with some of the retreats with the executive cabinet so that we're not having to do 4 times a year. We can do it so that we are meeting up. I know we used to do sometimes Saturdays where it was like a 4-hour session on a Saturday to get it so that it all can be in there. But again, this is something that we go over, so any thoughts or opinions would be greatly appreciated.
Chair Schwartz, for clarity, you are suggesting for next year's goals or tasks that to add to make sure that the board self-evaluation is added to that. Is that correct?
If that is something that the board wants to do, I would suggest doing it the years that we do have possibly new board members. So every other year, along with at least one
So not the
professional,
election year.
not the election year, the following year.
Thank you.
Yes.
I know we did board self-evaluations with my 916 board, and I saw some things that were helpful with it, but overall I didn't really see anything that really helped the board relations. And as far as the training, and I think that doing the governance, doing this part with our retreat would definitely be preferable.
So the only thing that gives me, or that I think about with the self-evaluation is, when did we go to the National School Board meeting? A couple years ago? 2 or 3 years ago, yeah. So I attended a session with these researchers from Texas A&M who evaluate board impact on student outcomes. And one of the things that they had mentioned was that one of the things that boards do that positively impact student outcomes is board self-evaluation and board, the board governance plan for sure, but having a robust self-evaluation process. And it turns, I'm not exactly sure how, they didn't go into their research in depth or whatever, but I remember taking that away as one of the key points that we should think about. Now, I don't know, they're in Texas, there's gotta be 8 billion school districts in Texas. I don't know what exactly they do that we don't do already, or if we're already doing some things that are part of the self-evaluation cycle. But, as we talk about student outcomes, it seems like we should maybe consider things that we know statistically positively impact student outcomes.
I guess I'd like a little more information on how, because I know
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go find my notes.
I have attended some of those, and a lot of them are sales.
Oh, no, they were actual professors. They
Okay.
were not like hire my consulting firm kind of people.
Okay,
I
because
do know,
I've
also
that
been
some
to
of them
expos.
are those, and then they're going to tell you that, oh yeah, our firm has found that this does this, hire our firm to do this.
Yeah.
Because I know, I feel that it could possibly be helpful if you get everyone to take it. But again, it's also what do we do with that information? Because we've taken them and then we've
just let them sit.
Just never done anything with the information. We sit in a closed session, we say this is what it was, but then it doesn't go anywhere. So I would like maybe some more information as to how it helps student outcomes before we try to add it as an every.
Yeah, let me go see if I can find my notes from then. Also I think the other thing that is a factor in there is just also how comprehensively board members engage with this self-evaluation, right? Like
Exactly.
Andrew's example of like, I'm just gonna hit C for every answer and be out of here in 5 minutes, that might have a different impact.
Right.
And be less useful.
Anyone else have any thoughts or?
Just
Yes.
on the board self-evaluation, that would be, well done, would be a way to determine what PD the board
Correct.
should work with.
Correct. Okay. No other discussion. We can move on if I can find my agenda so we can move on.
So the only thing
Yes.
we're adding for the
Yes.
25-26 school year then is the board self-evaluations. Is that in
The
agreement?
board self, and then the other one is on there, correct? The professional development, wasn't
Yeah,
that
board
already on
PD
there?
2 times annually.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We will move on to our last workshop item, and that is open enrollment parameters, and that will be presented by Kelly.
All right, good evening again. Just waiting for the presentation to come up. I think Superintendent Nielsen's talked about we start school, we get kids here, and then we talk about next year. So here I am. We are here to introduce the open enrollment parameters for 26-27 school year. You'll see our timeline, why this is necessary in the fall. As a reminder, open enrollment provides non-resident families an opportunity to attend SoWashCo schools. And this is a Minnesota statute that it's called the Open Enrollment or the Enrollment Options Program. And through a resolution in statute, we may limit the number of kids that we accept for open enrollment. But we do want to participate in open enrollment instead of just closing totally. Those are like the two options. We participate, we can limit with the resolution, or we just say we are not open to open enrollment ever. And so with unknown things, we have decided to do the third bullet, whereas in the business meeting in October, we'll bring the resolution back to you that will have the data of the number of open enrolled students in each grade level along with some capacity restrictions. So if you participate in when the resolution is reached, we have to set a parameter in which the number of students we will at least accept. And the least number you can accept is 1%. And so what this says is we will accept, 1% or the number of students who open enroll outside of our district. So we are saying through this that we will accept at least 1% of a grade level or the number of students who have enrolled outside of our district that live in our district, whichever number is less. So we'll accept at least 1% of a grade level, or if we've got more than 1%, we'd stay at the 1%. If we have less than 1%, that's the number of kids we'd accept. Through our resolution, and because our buildings vary so much in capacity, we also in our resolution define capacity and say, if a building has reached 90% as an elementary or 95% as a high school, those buildings are also closed to open enrollment. There are other factors that you can see there that we have listed: student to staff ratios, enrollment, staffing, size and physical attributes of the facility, recommendations from MDE, MDH. Those had to do with COVID restrictions, if that would ever come back again, let's hope not. Social distancing, any other factor. So basically, if we wanted to try to define any of these in our resolution to limit open enrollment, we could. We really do stay to the 1% or capacity in our grade levels. So basically, open enrollment applications will be approved if space is available for the applicant under the enrollment cap standards. So all those things that we listed, staffing, et cetera. The requested school is under 90% or 95%, but as a reminder, when someone enrolls into our district, they are enrolling in the grade level. They are not enrolling in a school at that point. They request schools, but we are saying you can enroll in kindergarten, and here are the schools that are available to you in kindergarten. Once we enroll a student, we consider them ours. So they stay on our pathway. So if a student is enrolled in Crestview and their pathway is Cottage Grove Middle and Park, even if they were at capacity, they are considered ours once they're our student. So we wouldn't say at 6th grade, sorry, there's no room at Cottage Grove, we're gonna send you over to Lake. So just as an example, once they're enrolled, they're ours. So basically, these are the 3 reasons that we would say yes. To give you an example, this year when we looked at open enrollment applications, we start with kindergarten because that is the grade that we would start with, that 1% or the number of our kids that are out, because that's the grade we are accepting open enrollment applications for sure in. The other grade levels, we look at how many open enrolled we have and if we have space in buildings. So we're here today because the timeline is coming up. December 1st through January 15th is the application window. Any applications received after January 15th receive the next number on the wait list. And then by February, we like to let families know if they have been accepted for open enrollment. Gives them time to make that decision, and then we can make sure that we are counting them in our initial staffing numbers. So as I mentioned in the business meeting, I'll bring back the resolution that will have the details regarding how many students we have and the capacity numbers. If you recall, last year our resolution closed all of our middle schools and all of our high schools except for SoWashCo Online to open enrollment because of the capacity. Right now we're kind of crunching the numbers with some of the additions and where we're at and whether we'd want to close open enrollment at a certain school or grade level. Those would be part of that resolution at the end of October. So what questions do you have?
Anyone have questions? I just have a quick question. When will we know, like, around how many students we may possibly be losing to the new math and science?
I know Ms. Nielsen's working really closely with their executive director and just kind of what their enrollment timeline is, and they're really being open around this is what we're trying to make sure we know our timeline. We also have our choice programs so all of those timelines are like January, February, I think they're hoping, but I know you've been working with them.
Chris and I are meeting with Dr. Hinton next week, and that's just going to start taking a look at their staffing timeline and some of the deadlines they're operating underneath along with our staffing timeline. So we hope to, if we need to, make some slight adjustments. We just want to make sure that as we go into this new school year, we're not overstaffing, and then students are, enroll in MSA. And so that will be a key part of the timeline.
One question I have is if a kid, so if I'm a 3rd grader or whatever, and I get off the wait list and I go to, and I'm open enrolled into our schools, right? And I go to Crestview, and then I get off the wait list and I go to MSA, and then I decide this is not the right environment for me and I want to come back. Do they come back as a new student, or do they come back with some sort of priority because they've already been one of our kids?
And they're a non-resident?
And they're a non-resident.
They would have to reopen enroll.
Reopen enroll. Okay.
Yep.
And so the pathway may be entirely different than what it was when they first started. There's no like grandparenting into, okay.
I do have one question. Knowing our capacity issues, do we take the pathway into consideration when we allow students into an elementary school?
Yes. Yes, we have actually for 4 or 5 years, yep. We have.
And then do we choose, so if there's multiple pathways from a middle school to a high school, are they given what that pathway will be when they start or when they're in 8th grade? Are they told at 8th grade, this is where you'll go next year?
So a good example is Oltman, because it's like a 60-40 school,
right?
What student information does is kind of look, where is that kid coming from? So if they're coming from Hastings, they would be probably boundaried to Park. If they're coming from North St. Paul, they would probably be boundaried to Eastridge. So she does look where they're coming from, and I would say probably maybe once or twice, a student who's open enrolled, they are not told in 6th grade, but that's, if they ask, that would be the answer. Well, we look where you live, and we look at which high school is closer. And we probably get 1 or 2 a year that it's like, well, I was at Oltman and I'm open enrolled and I was put at Eastridge, but I really want to go to Park. And so we would say, okay, then that can be your pathway. So we try to work with families, and it's a few and far between that we do that, but we do look at where they live and what's convenient for them.
So if they would want, say, an IB program, and one of their pathways we would
For sure.
make those exceptions so that they can, but obviously we wouldn't say, none of your pathways are Woodbury, but you want this program. They wouldn't likely get into Woodbury over a district student that would want.
I would say no, unless we put them at Eastridge, because we thought that's where they'd want to go, and Eastridge has 120% capacity, and Woodbury has 95% capacity, and they wanted Woodbury, we'd say sure.
Right, yeah, no, I know that's always gonna be like, if you wanna go to the school that doesn't have as much, we're going to do it, but we're not going to move them over.
Right,
And
over our
if it's
kids.
not the pathway that would be their original.
And I was just going to add to that too. We do all of our inter-district transfers well before we accept open enrolled students. So any students of ours that live in our district that want to switch schools, we do all of those first. And if there's spots left after that, then we would allow open enrolled students into our district that don't live in our district. Yes.
Anyone else? Okay. We can move on to 6.0 information items. We do have 2 of those this evening. 6.1 is the financial update, and that will be presented by Chris Blackburn, Director of Business Services.
All right, I think the control room has us tonight. So, I don't know. Woohoo! Okay, so financial update. I will also share that I too had a typo. Apparently when you're working on preliminary levy, working on audit, and trying to hire a position, you put October 4th, which is not tonight. However, that said, I'm very excited to be here. So this evening we're going to speak about budget forecast. No, I noticed it today actually, and I was like, wait, what? Looked at my clock and watch, and I thought about putting it as a quiz, to be honest. So budget forecast model. So each year we like to just come to the board and talk about kind of what our process is for providing budget forecasts. We know that's an important part of our role. The purpose of why we do that is shown on the slide above, and that is really that we need to estimate the fund balance, future fund balances, to know kind of where we're at. We know that fund balance is largely our district's checkbook, and so that's what we have as we look at contracts, as we look at just future priorities, as we look at needs across the district. We know that that's monitored by Minnesota Department of Education. If we do end up at negative 2.5%, we know that's statutory operating debt. I know when I first started here, we got very close, but managed to stay out. So we do also know that board policy is 16.6%. They're going faster even than I can talk. We also know that the reason and the purpose we do the forecast model is also because we need to estimate any needed adjustments. So it allows us just a tool that we can work, again, just in those broad totals, because again, specifics are going to change. We also know that it's based on assumptions, and what do we know about assumptions is that they certainly may change. So the fund balance that we present is always based on the best information we have today, and we absolutely know that that can change. It's a snapshot in time, so what I present now might change by next week. And again, as we talk to Math and Science Academy, as we have just across the board, maybe changes enrollment, or other maybe expenditures change, maybe revenues change, the state makes a change in our aid, we know that can impact. So tonight we're, like I said, going to talk about, we're still wrapping up last fiscal year. The auditors do come, not that Nikki and I are counting, but I think it's 8 days, and they will be here for our 24-25 audit. So by the end of October, we should have pretty solid information about 24-25. So, see, I got to talk faster. So assumptions. I'll talk about this slide first, then I'll go kind of work backwards. Budgeted enrollment, just on this is a graphical presentation of that, because one of the largest assumptions we have is enrollment. We very much try to be conservative in that. We do use a historical capture methodology, so the red bars on this graph are actual numbers. The green is the current last fiscal year, 24-25, that we still are wrapping up. Student information is working very diligently to finalize those numbers. The blue is our budgeted enrollment. So I'll just point out that that is our budgeted projected at 19,213. And then the gray from 26-27 school year all the way to 30-31 is just estimated based on what we know. You will notice that it declines some. We've kind of bounced around a little, had pretty stable, but it does, we're anticipating it to decline. The reason for that, particularly with 26, 27, you'll notice a fairly, on this slide, maybe not quite so sharp, but a little sharper decline. And that does reflect the estimated impact of other program expansions, such as Math and Science Academy. So we do know Woodbury Leadership Academy is expanding as well, so we may see, what we know is it's very uncertain right now. So I would also just caution to, on these, that we know that things can change, and we'll continually be updating that and working behind the scenes administratively to ensure that we can best get ourselves positioned as we look forward. So years after 26, 27 right now, we're projecting about 100 student loss each year. Some of that is because as Math and Science Kindergarten, we know that we may continue to lose kindergarten to that program particularly. We also know that birth rates are continuing to be on the decline. Post-secondary enrollment options at the particular 11th and 12th grade, that we see some students make choices there. With our online programming, we sometimes see students come back to our system as well. We know that with athletics or other activities that we do see sometimes increases in those secondary grades. We are a very attractive school district. Again, the other enrollment options, whether in or out, we also know some students drop. And on the very positive note, I don't always like to just be doom and gloom, but we have continued growth in communities. So even we're made aware of the tank property. So I know I've heard people talk about being sad about sweet corn maybe, but we're excited to have some housing development in that area as well, with always some uncertainty of how many children that maybe bring in and students into our system. So now we can move past this slide, that's the visual, and again, this goes to the birth rates. So Washington County births, as a general rule, like our overall student population, we have 42% of Washington County resident population, but we usually capture a greater rate than that within our kindergarten classes. Again, this may be impacted with some of those choices that parents and families may make. But right now, this is a little dated. I know there was quite a delay. 2021, I do have the information on my desk, I realized, but I did move offices, and so I could not put my finger on it tonight, or when I put this together. And so we do know that, I would say that when Hazel Reinhardt had done the demographic study, it stayed pretty in line with that, with the births for 2021 anyway, because that is out now anyway, the actual, but again, kindergarten numbers are still a little bit projected yet. Although now I could probably change that because we do have kindergarten numbers. On the next slide then is the enrollment implications. And so here you will note that for 25, 26, kindergarten enrollment even is slightly under where that capture rate. So we did see some decline right now in some of those numbers. Perhaps that cohort survival methodology. So again, we look back historically as to where those students have typically come from in K and kind of make some assumptions there, that capture rate. Then we look at first grade from this past year that they roll into the second grade the next year. Second grade moves to third grade, and we know roughly what that, when we look over the last number of years, historical averages, we apply those. We also know historical averages sometimes are incorrect, and so maybe there's a blip. We know during the pandemic that definitely was a blip, so you see that negative 1.34% in 2020, 21 on that slide. And so we know that things can happen as well that impact those. So it's our, again, best information we have as of today. And so right now we are slightly anticipated to be over budget for 25, 26, although we'll very much continue to monitor that. The numbers in red on this slide do reflect, I thought it just prudent to, as we put these estimates together, these are the areas in which we're, there's just some specific targeted decreases in those grade levels based on what we currently know and anticipate. We know Math and Science Academy roughly right now that Dr. Hinton very generously has shared with us, about 67% of their students are South Washington County school students. So we've applied that factor. Again, knowing historical may not hold true as we move forward. Maybe they Woodbury leadership families might go to that school instead. So it's really, I would say I've kind of want to have a really good crystal ball, but we can use as best as we know today. So, excuse me. On the next slide then, the other significant, so we talk about enrollment because it does impact that revenue. The reason is because of the basic formula is the large one, and that is for 25, 26, we know that $7,481 per pupil unit. And they do use adjusted pupil units. We know that secondary students are weighted at a greater level than elementary students. It did increase 2.74% in 25, 26, and that was reflected in our budget. Future years are tied to inflation, and again, that was set by statute a couple of years ago. So the floor, the minimum of 2% up to a maximum of 3%. They certainly could change that legislatively as well. And so again, this past spring, we were kind of monitoring just to see if there was any either additional increase or perhaps a change to that, but that did not occur. It is determined again by the state legislature, and as these assumptions, again, in forecasting, so we use 2.5% in each of the next 3 years that we present this evening. And I'll remind the board and the public that that basic formula makes up about 43 to 45% of our general fund budgeted revenues. So again, not quite half, but just slightly under half of our dollars we get that revenue on. On the other revenue assumptions then, for state special education is our other single biggest state aid, and we know that generally it increases with expenses. So as expenses go up, since it's a reimbursement program, generally that amount of aid we receive will also increase. I have an asterisk here this evening, and that is because we do know that there's two particular impacts. This past spring that they passed a reduction in special education transportation reimbursement. We used to historically had been reimbursed at 100% for special transportation. That number was lowered to 95. We were able to incorporate that into our 25-26 budget. It's about a $750,000 loss in revenue anticipated. We also know that next year, starting in 26-27, that number will go down again by another 5% to 90%. So we would anticipate another similar adjustment in revenue. Projected impact of the Blue Ribbon Commission on Special Education for 27 and 28, as well as 28-29 school year. And I'll say, I call it sometimes my chicken scratch math, but in looking at what our percentage of the total special education costs across the state, and then what our aid kind of thereof is, it's about, I'm projecting about a $3 million in each of those years decrease in our special education aid. So again, a significant number. We also know our operating referendum increases with inflation, and federal title and federal special education, so our federal programs, we're assuming that they're gonna remain flat as they have not fluctuated significantly. And again, as we've spoken here before, that's less than 2% of our budget. Fees, admissions, and other, so interest, for example, we also assume flat typically. Interest is probably one that we take a little closer look at depending on what the environment is doing.
Chris, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
So you had mentioned this reduction in special education transportation is $750,000 per year starting this year?
Mm-hmm.
And it will, and then starting 2 years from now, it'll be $3 million roughly speaking for special ed. So 3 years from now, it'll be $3 million plus $750,000 is our gap from what we currently have or what we had last year, and that we expect that gap to continue in perpetuity?
Correct. Okay. And so I think as we talk about some of that, I want to be careful too that we're not kind of duplicating those decreases as well in there. But yeah, we have, it's just some significant challenges I think with the funding at the state that we will be continuing to face. So. On the next slide, so that kind of takes care of the revenue side. On the expenditure assumptions, and we know the single biggest expenditure of school district mates, we invest in our people. So salaries and benefits, we know it's about 78% of our expenditures is tied in salaries and benefits. So whether that's my salary, our teacher salaries, our paraprofessionals, we had speakers this evening, Superintendent Nielsen, the rest of exec cabinet across the board, our custodians, our food service, just all of those across at 78%. There are 11 bargaining units, so they're all negotiated contracts, 9 of which are in general fund. Steps or longevity are built in, so steps are a natural increase from one year to the next, and many contracts have that. Some do not, but often we see that, and there's some also have longevity, that maybe there's an additional amount for each year of service to the district. In the teacher contract, there's steps and lanes, so slightly different. I did realize I forgot to also include longevity in here now with the last contract settlement, but lanes are educational advancement. So if they receive their master's, then there's a lane advancement as well, and then that step is that natural increment for year of service. We go from up to step 8, step R, so we've lettered them now, equivalent about 18. Percentage on salaries and wages, this is often referred to as cost of living adjustment. So as we're talking, we know that, you know, I've gone to the grocery store and gotten my bill and had a little bit of sticker shock. We know that certainly our staff have experienced the very same. And so in addition to the steps and lanes, often when we're negotiating, it's really up. What additional percentage? We're going to get that step kind of automatically. What additional to really help offset that cost of living? Generally, we settle 2-year agreements for almost all of our bargaining units. We also know that when we settle that, anytime salary goes up, payroll tax goes up as well. And so we know that whether that's TRA, whether that's PERA, the FICA portion, that we know that those will also increase as an employer paid tax. The additional part this year that's a little unique is on January 1st, we will have Paid Leave Act. So there's a tax, the paid leave tax in Minnesota, that we are required by state statute to pay at least half of. So right now, we're projecting that to be the 0.44%. That's the statutory obligation for the employer, and that we will cover that portion. And similarly, that our employees will also experience a tax on their wages to that same equivalent. We're required to pay a minimum of 50%. So that's going to be another just additional tax. And again, we factored that into this year's budget, but as we look forward as well, that this will be brand new for the state. So kind of that hesitancy of, is there any changes future as well for that? Other expenditure assumptions. So we know beyond salaries and benefits, there still is a significant number, 22% of other expenditures. And as I looked historically, some years we've used a different average. As I looked the last few years, we've tracked about 5%. So I did adjust the model to reflect about 5% average across these other areas. So this includes professional services, it includes substitute teachers and paraprofessionals, contracted transportation, excuse me, utility and fuel costs, which we know are, I did see Excel already has proposed a new increase as well. We know snow removal, which can vary significantly year to year. We also know textbooks, and we know their cost continues to increase and rise as well, along with software subscriptions, supplies and materials, so just pens, paper, and maybe construction paper, and rugs for classrooms, all sorts of things there, equipment, and devices as well for students and staff. So when we look to the next slide, the miscellaneous expenditure assumptions. So we also know on the flip side that we do have some retirements. And so as a district, we do realize, I'll say, savings when we replace a super experienced, maybe well-educated staff and the teachers, or even just a long-term staff in any group, that we experience about 30,000 per staff retirement. And so we typically see about 30 per year. What it would also share is we know that our overall employee population is getting more experienced. And so a wonderment of mine would be, do we see an uptick in that as well that may result in some other savings additionally? But we also know that staffing fluctuations due to enrollment changes. So as we know that enrollment goes up or down, we may need to add or that just natural kind of result of that will result in some staffing changes as well. So again, they'll fluctuate based on those enrollment, whether up or down. We also know that we always incorporate any new buildings or leases. So for example, we brought the transition building on, we know that we'll have costs such as electric and utilities for that as well. We also know if there's any new leases, we incorporate that. So when we have new buses, for example. So the next slide is our projected, based on all of these assumptions currently, this is the projected revenues and expenditures. And as you'll note, 24-25 is based on our revised budget. 25-26 reflects our original budget. In the 3 following years, 26-27, 27-28, and 28-29, reflect just estimates based on the assumptions we just discussed. What you'll notice is that, again, expenditures are now starting to outpace revenues. And we've been through some different cycles where that has happened, right? We know we made some very mindful investments in staff. We also know that the state has not kept up with inflation. So I know we've talked about that base formula, and in this year alone, we would have, had they kept up with inflation, it would have been a $30 million revenue increase for us in this year alone. So again, we know that the state isn't, so kind of that combo effect of some rising costs, again, to try to keep up with inflation for our staff so they can continue to meet their needs. And we know it just doesn't align then. So again, that's outpacing and kind of getting a little upside down on that. If we go to the next slide, and I should also, the budget forecast also reflects that declining enrollment. So again, a little maybe newer of a situation for us here in SoWashCo. So you'll notice at the top, I'm going to go back one slide if you can, thank you, projected fund balance, and this does note with adjustments. So I'll talk about that in a moment. in 24-25, again, revised budget, 25-26, original or preliminary budget, and those following 3 years. So you'll notice that that fund balance is projected to decrease in each of those years. And so right now, what I would also note is that adjustments that I put in here as I was looking, and we always talk about how do we ensure that we are fiscally stable. And so as I looked at that, without any adjustments, it would have been that we would have been in statutory operating debt with a -6% by 28-29 if we unmitigated anything. So we did have to take a look and say, what would we anticipate and what might we see? This slide here does reflect adjustments of $10 million in each year, 26-27, 27-28, and 28-29. I would also share, that's a significant amount. I would also share as you look around the metro and even watching the news lately, right? This is not a unique issue to South Washington County, right? We've seen, again, as the state hasn't kept pace and as they're adjusting state special education aid and their, dollars here and dollars there, we know that, again, it's really challenging sometimes to just make that right sized. We know we hear a lot from about small class sizes and things like that, and we know that comes at a cost as well. And so we really try hard to say, what can we do? I would note with adjustments, we always look at if there's any revenue enhancements as well as what sort of adjustments we can make. And that's we always continually look for efficiencies every year as well. So just a small one, I know that we changed how we were buying copy paper, and so we just anticipated to save about $35,000 just by that small change. So we always try to find those things that we can make small changes as well. Again, with that, I think.
Chris, I'm just going to interject because I think that this slide is really important. As we've talked about negotiations and paying our people, this one is particularly important because we know that over time, how quickly that money goes. And as Chris shared, without $10 million worth of adjustments this year to be implemented next year, we would be in statutory operating debt by 28-29. And so once we get done with the audit, that will be a next step prior to going into staffing, but we're going to have some serious conversations about what does that $10 million look like and where does that come from. I think one thing that we've taken a lot of pride in the last years is that we really have grown our fund balance. We've been extremely lean. We've said no often, but we just simply can't keep pace with 2.7 going in and then wanting to make sure that we compensate all of our employees. And that's part of what it takes to do business when you're a people industry. And so I want to make sure that the board is clear and understands that it would mean $10 million worth of adjustments this year as we go into the 26-27 school year.
Does anyone have any questions?
So, Chris, can I ask a couple questions? So you were mentioning $10 million this year, right? Mm-hmm. And then each of the following 2 years also $10 million, or the $10 million that we cut this year would have?
Nope, we would need to cut in total, then this would reflect $30 million by the end of 28-29.
And by cutting $30 million by 28-29, that gets us to a 10% fund balance.
Correct. And I'll share too, again, a reminder as well, this anticipates perhaps a loss of up to 600 students. If that number is more or less, right, that's going to impact. And so I think it just highlights the importance of us to continue to have conversations with Dr. Hinton at Math and Science and to really, as we're going into staffing, to make sure that we know what that number is. Because if we overstaff, right, we know that we can't adjust until the following year again too. And so wanting to be absolutely mindful too and make sure that we're appropriately staffed, but to really be as best as we can to know what those numbers are looking like before we staff. Because once we staff, we don't take staff back, right? That we know they're on contract and we absolutely want to adhere to that. And so, we also know that we built that fund balance up to try to help mitigate. I think it's just that matter of, as we're growing that and we're taking those hits in those other areas, it is really challenging.
And so this would be then, Julie and Chris, the same budget adjustment, similar to the budget adjustment process we went through in 2021, January of 2021.
Correct.
Correct.
And so we would have to do that this year, 25, 26. We would have to do an additional 10 million, have a similar budget adjustment process, 26, 27, and then a similar budget adjustment process, 27, 28.
And so there's a few ways we could do that. We certainly could have a larger process up front. And again, as we find more numbers and can fine tune that, we'll absolutely. I think it's it's just prudent, again, shared with Julie, I said I did think about putting the slide like without any adjustment, what that might look like. But I will tell you this, it is very challenging because there's a lot of unknowns. And I also don't want to and just say, oh, we're going to be okay, right? Because it's absolutely prudent on us to make sure that we have that fiscal accountability and stability long-term and are mindful of our taxpayer dollars, right? And so it's trying to balance all of those realities, right? While still valuing employees, while still making sure that our students have their needs met. But yes, so certainly we could take a look what that looks like. So if we didn't want to have a process each year, do we look at, maybe 15 million each of the next 2 years? It allows us time to, if we do an adjustment now, it also allows us time to know what really is that impact of MSA, right? Because then we'll be but we also want to, we know the sooner that we make those adjustments, right? It's that kind of compounded effect as we look forward, right? So if we say, well, let's try to squeak by one more year, it really puts us in a worse situation the following.
And of course, the board would always have the option to take a look at an additional operating levy. And I think we also want to be thoughtful about that, about going out to our community to ask for more. So it does mean, it's difficult to operate within your means when you receive 2.7, and we know that the money going out when we're such a people-based business is more than 2.7 per year, just to keep up with the annual cost of living.
For an operating levy, what is our gap between what we have asked our community for to date and what the state allows us to?
So currently, the amount that we would maybe be able to capture, for lack of a better term, would be about $225 per student pupil, right? And so it's not it doesn't solve this, right?
That's
it's
like
about
$4 million, right? Yeah.
We also know that we potentially could increase the capital projects levy. We chose to do $5 million, as that's what we heard was supportive for the community, but we also know that potentially, right, we know the cost of all those devices and those softwares continues to increase pretty significantly sometimes, and not a lot of control. It's kind of like textbooks back in the day when we actually bought physical books, which we still do some, but we know that sometimes there's not a lot of control over that. And so when we get hit with cycles, right, because the state will say, hey, here's a new cycle, and that we have to, and we absolutely should, but it does come at a cost, right? And so there's perhaps some opportunity for some capital projects levy pieces with that to kind of help offset even our as we've increased technologies and devices, right, to make sure that we can pay for those as well as maybe the staff who are supporting that. And so right now we certainly have a portion. There would be an additional opportunity there. But again, that comes at a cost to our taxpayers when we know they're being pressured too, the same pressures that we are as employees in our own lives. So I think it's just a lot of good conversations that we'll continue to have to see how best we might do this.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. On to 6.2, and that is first reading of proposed policy changes, and that will be presented by Julie Nielsen, Superintendent.
Good evening. In routine and regular fashion, bringing forward 7 policies in the 300 series, along with 1 policy, 613. Our policy committee met last week and reviewed the policies. The recommendations coming forth, policy 301, school district administration, there are just some minor grammatical changes. And for the next policies, policy 302, superintendent, 303, superintendent selection, 304, superintendent contract duties and evaluation, 305, policy implementation, and 306, administrator code of ethics. There are no suggested changes. Policy 307, the committee determined that they would like to delete the policy as it is not an MSBA policy. And in addition, in policy 307, it is actually governed by Minnesota Statute 13817, where it states the state of Minnesota, the Department of Administration has created a school district general records retention schedule. It is located on the Minnesota State Archives website underneath the general record retention schedules. So there is already a Minnesota statute out there that we are governed in terms of records retention. And then finally, policy 613, graduation requirements. There are some legal updates that have been made. You'll see on page 3, there is one addition with grade 8 algebra. a couple of other cleanups on letter D, and then finally letter H, making sure that our 9th graders, by the time they're in 11th or 12th grade, have a personal finance class. So those are the additions to that policy 613. Any questions from the board?
Okay, seeing none, thank you. Did anybody sign up? Okay. Okay, we will move on to 7.0, and that will be reports and comments. Superintendent Nielsen.
Thank you. Students, you hit a long board meeting. I'm just going to tell you, I feel like this has been long. You're probably like, people are getting up to go to the bathroom. When's my break time? This is a long one. Thank you for hanging in there with us. Next week, just to note, we will be recognizing our wonderful high school students in their fall awards program. Eastridge and Woodbury High School will have their awards on Monday the 6th. Eastridge will be at 7:30 a.m. and Woodbury High School at 7 o'clock p.m. And then Park High School next Thursday the 9th at 9:30 a.m. Also a reminder to the board and the community that October 11th, we'll be hosting our marching band showcase at Eastridge High School at 2 p.m. It is always a great event and a wonderful opportunity to see all 3 of our high schools come together. And finally, as we look forward yet another week, we're almost to the end of the year, as Kelly said, like we start and we're going. October 15th, we will have no school for K-8 students. That day is a day scheduled for high school students where 10th and 11th graders will be coming in and testing, and 9th and 12th graders will be learning asynchronous that day. And then, of course, as our calendar says, it is our MEA break, no school on the 16th and 17th of that week. Thank you.
Okay, on to board members. Just a reminder, board members do send any reports for committees they are on to Dana to be included in the minutes. But we do share any events, upcoming events that could be going on within those. Does anybody have any upcoming events? No? I know it's the beginning of the year, not much yet. We will move on to 8.0, and that is our future meeting dates. October 23rd is a school board business meeting here at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. November 6th is a school board workshop meeting here at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. Then we'll move on to 9.0, and that is a closed session pursuant to Minnesota 13D.05, Subdivision 3A for the superintendent's evaluation. There will be no action following our return from closed session, so can I get a motion to?
So moved.
This closed section? Motion by Simi, second.
Yeah, I was fast, Sharon.
Seconded by Sharon. Any comments? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.